On December 8th of 2016, at 1:15 a.m., I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was stillborn. At 18 weeks gestation, he was not developed or strong enough to endure the birthing process. To our surprise, a fully developed human being, see-through skin, his foot the size of my thumbprint, and a very prominent upper lip, just like his daddy's. He was perfect and beautiful. We named him Deacon. Deacon made me a mom, and Deacon changed my life forever. To say I was crushed, devastated even, would be a gross understatement. Everything I knew to be true had been shattered into unrecognizable pieces. I had been shattered into unrecognizable pieces, and I had no idea if or how they would go back together again. It is here, in this space, that I met grief intimately for the first time. This is not to say that I had never lost before, and it was the first time I wasn't shoving the feelings away and pushing forward with my life. I grew up adapting to my surroundings and what people needed from me. That adaptation both helped shape the person I am and led me to a less than healthy path. By 16 years old, I had an eating disorder. I would starve myself, only allowing consumption of carrots and celery to help curb the hunger pains. At 17, I was raped, which was the catalyst to a string of unhealthy relationships, and then a few years of promiscuous behavior, leading to contracting a sexually transmitted infection, causing damage to my fallopian tubes. Darren, my husband, and I's journey to becoming parents is similar to many's, and unique in that we had had 5 years of unexplained infertility before my gynecologist insisted we needed to do fertility testing. Up until that point, I believed it would happen when it was meant to happen, and would sit on the toilet each month crying when my period would arrive, marking the loss of another month attempting conception. In the summer of 2016, we began fertility treatment. 18 eggs were retrieved, 7 embryos survived, 1 embryo was implanted. With a blocked tube and less than 5% chance of getting pregnant on our own, I was pregnant on our first attempt at IVF, or in vitro fertilization. Throughout the years of pain, I pushed on, never allowing the space or time to feel into it. As long as I kept my mind busy and occupied, I would not have to feel any of it. I quickly found myself in the greatest storm of emotional trauma I had ever experienced. I was sitting face to face with the darkness of grief, and I was committed to sitting with it until it had taught me everything that it had come to teach me. Glennon Doyle says, "Pain is a traveling professor. When pain knocks, the wise ones breathe deep and say, 'Come in, sit down with me, and don't leave until you've taught me everything that I need to know.' My professor had arrived, and I was inviting them to stay. I was grieving the loss of our son and the loss of myself. As January approached, the feeling that I should be going back to work was more than being felt. I certainly did not trust myself to decide what I needed, and going back to work in the new year was what work wanted, what our families expected of me. People would say, "Get back to work and you'll feel better. Just getting back to it. You'll get back to it, everything will be better." All I heard was, "Go back." Every ounce of my being was screaming, "Don't do it." And I did what I thought was the right thing to do. I worked 2 days, and after the second day, I told my husband I was never going back. I felt that if I went back to my job, my place of work, where the last time I was there, I was blissfully pregnant, I would be trying to go back to that version of me. It was impossible to go back, because Stephanie from December 7th of 2016 no longer existed. I was a new version of her, and Deacon's birth had forever changed me. I needed to figure out who I was now. Deacon's mom, childless, no longer pregnant, filled with sorrow version of me. I realized that there were moments in our lives where from one day to the next, you are forever changed. Perhaps for some, it is one instance. Perhaps for many others, there are many. For me, at this point in my life, there are two. The day I was raped and the day I gave birth and said goodbye to Deacon. I grieved in seeking and silence. I seeked ceremony. I seeked my faith. I began a journey of discovery inward, where I sat in the nursery night after night, writing out the details of the night I was raped. I felt that if I could make sense of that night, the first explosion of what I knew to be true, I would somehow better understand all that had led me here. After weeks of not sleeping, I asked for help. I began working with my counselor, Dr. P, and she recommended I see my family doctor as well. I was given medication to aid with anxiety and a sleeping aid as well to help curb the all-night nursery journal sessions where I attempted to understand history. It was my attempt to trying to figure out the decisions I had made with the information I had now. My 17, 18, 19, and 20-year-old me didn't have the tools that I had now, and the bar I was holding her to was unfair and destructive. I needed grace. My younger self needed grace, nurturing, and love. She didn't need judgment. In between touchstone appointments with Dr. P, I would journal, cry, sleep, rest, visit with a friend or family member, or I would go to nature, walk, touch a tree, sit by the water, reconnect to myself, the world around me, and gave myself full permission to feel anything and everything that was coming up for me. I was grieving so much more than the loss of Deacon. I was grieving the loss of my innocence, the idea that I may never become a mother, whether I would be a good mother if I was ever fortunate enough to get there. I was grieving my past traumas and choices. All of the shame, blame, fear, and sadness was bubbling to the surface, and for the first time, I was allowing it to. In full surrender to the process, I let it all come, be seen, felt, and acknowledged. Over the past 2.5 years since we said goodbye to Deacon, we have experienced 4 more failed attempts at IVF conception. Each time a transfer was unsuccessful, we would mourn and grieve the loss, both old and new. Each due date, birthday, Mother's and Father's Day, that passes brings a new wave of emotion, a new layer of grief. As time passes, I am discovering that the layers of grief are fewer and farther apart than they used to be, and there is more space in between. Yet when the next layer hits, it still carries with it the rawness that has always been there. As each layer arrives, is worked through, and passes, we are reminded of the reality that we will grieve for the rest of our lives. This rawness is the new normal. It's hard, it hurts, and it's beautiful, kind, gracious, and so full of love. The honesty and grace that Darren and I have offered and accepted from one another is greater than I knew possible. I can be raw with him, expose my deepest fears and my darkest thoughts, and still be loved unconditionally. Grief taught me that. Becoming a parent has brought me the greatest gifts and the deepest caverns of grief. The faith and hope I still possess is nothing short of a miracle or insanity, depending on whose opinion you hear. Through the grief, I've been reminded that the gifts of life are found on the other side of pain. It is in the feeling and healing our pain that the true gifts of our lives are found. Grief has forever changed me. I am softer, more compassionate, curious, and adventurous. Knowing I survived the depths of the caverns gives me the strength, courage, and power to conquer the mountains. For me, grief lies in the space between. Grief lies in the reconciliation of what was and what might have been to what is. Faith is the reconciliation of what is to what is possible. Grief taught me that anything is possible because I have walked the valleys and I know my way out. Faith gives me the courage to keep walking. I am a warrior. Thank you.